You can look at a lot of different examples in the history of our country where our country has been in desperate times. I think about, let's go back to the Great Depression, and there was poverty, there was uncertainty, there was just times of distress where people didn't have their needs being met. People were worried about finding jobs. They were worried about their farms and prices of crops and livestock and all these things. And people were just at a point of desperation. People were just at a point to where they were just overwhelmed with anxiety and pressures of life, trying to take care of their families. We were worried on the individual level. We were worried about our families. We were worried about ourselves. And then we were also worried about our country as a whole, our nation as a whole. Where in the world are things going? What is going to happen? What can we do? And it was a time of desperation. I want to open up my heart to you even further right now. And I don't mean this to be a pity party. I'm not trying to get you to feel sorry for me. I think that by me saying this is I'm hoping that you can relate to what I'm saying to you in your life. Over the last 6 or 8 weeks, it has been just a time of testing. It seems like one thing after another in my life has produced anxiety. And I'm not just talking about one area of my life. I'm talking about things in different areas. It seems like that you have something that breaks out, and it's something that bothers you, it's something that worries you, and that's enough, isn't it? That's just enough, and we get to the point to where that's all I need. I don't need any more problems on my plate. But then it seems like that something else would break out, and then so we had this problem here in this part of our life, and then something else would happen, and you had this issue over here in this part of our life, and then you say, "Oh Lord, that is way enough. I don't need anything else." And then you look up, and it seems like that something else in another part of your life would just pop up, and it's too much, and you get to the point to where you start doubting. You start doubting yourself. You start doubting others. You start. Sometimes it even produces conflict in your life, doesn't it? You start to lash out at people. Your patience is thin. And you just don't know what in the world is happening. And what we just get to the point of is this desperation. Desperation, and that's what I want to talk to you tonight about, is about in a time of desperation, what do you do? Open your Bible tonight to the book of Isaiah, chapter 31, and I want to show you an example of what happens in a time of desperation, and then what does God say to you in a time of desperate times. What in the world do you do? And in this passage in Isaiah chapter 31, you're going to be able to grasp it very easily, because a lot of the background and a lot of the context to Isaiah chapter 31 we talked about it in the book of Nahum. And in this time period of Israel, when Isaiah was prophesying to Judah, it was when the Assyrian Empire was just a menace to the world. They were a nation that was always trying to conquer, always trying to bring people in subjection, always trying to oppress people. And the people of Israel were conquered by the Assyrians and taken off into captivity. And I'm talking about the northern 10 tribes. Well, the people of Judah are sitting there around Jerusalem, and they are constantly under the threat of an Assyrian invasion, of being overwhelmed and overrun by the Assyrians. And it produced just a lot of uncertainty in their life. That's what the message here in Isaiah 31 is all about. I'm going to read our text tonight, and then we're going to go back through it. But look at Isaiah 31, and we're just going to look at 5 verses tonight. it'll be enough. There is a message here. God has a message for us in these 5 verses. Follow along as I read Isaiah 31, beginning at verse 1. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but who do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise and will bring disaster, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of those who work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, both he who helps will fall, and he who is helped will fall down. They all will perish together. For thus the Lord has spoken to me. As a lion roars and a young lion over his prey, when a multitude of shepherds is summoned against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor be disturbed by their noise. So the Lord of hosts will come down to fight for Mount Zion and for its hill. Like birds flying about, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending, he will also deliver it. Passing over, he will preserve it. The words of Isaiah here are the words directly from God, and he gives this message to the people of Judah. He gives them a message in times of desperation, when they would begin to doubt, and they would begin to second guess, and that's what desperation does, doesn't it? It gets us to begin to doubt that God is in control of some of the things in our life. We begin to doubt, did we do something wrong? Are we being chastised? Is something happening to me because I'm being judged by God? Is something happened to me? And where am I going to do? Who do I need to call upon? And we begin in times of desperation to somewhat vacillate. Over the last few weeks, I just want to confess to you that there's been times where I have, for moments, I have vacillated and begin to wonder, is there something that I need to do? Is there something I can do to fix this? But then I realize that there's nothing I can do, and the best thing I can do right now is trust God. The best thing I can do is remember that God is in control, and no matter what, He's going to bring me through it. You know, there's that old saying, and it's not silly. I think it's a little bit maybe overused sometimes. But the things that God will bring you to, He will also bring you through. You've heard that before, haven't you? He will bring you through these things. And that's the message. That's really the crux of the message of Isaiah here, is that they are going to be looking to other things besides God. And he's saying, don't do that. You need to trust God. The first thing I want you to see tonight is to remember to trust in God's superiority. We believe that God is superior. We believe that God is supreme. But in times of desperation, we forget that, don't we? Sometimes we begin to look around and we begin to look to the right and the left and we begin, how can I fix this? What can I do? But I'm telling you, the message here is to trust in God's superiority. Don't ever forget that, and that's the message in the first 3 verses that he is telling us. Watch this, in verse 1, there is a warning to Judah for trusting in a political or a military alliance. He says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help. Oftentimes in these desperate times, we begin to look and say, what can help me? Who can help me? I need some help. I am reaching for a lifeline. I am drowning. I am overwhelmed. I need some help. That's what we all say. I need help. Well, what he's saying here, there's a warning here to looking and trusting for other solutions for this problem. In this case, they were looking for a political or a military alliance. They were going to Egypt for help. You remember in the book of Nahum what he said there in the 3rd chapter, and he said, did Thebes, that city in Egypt, did they fare any better? And he was talking to Assyria there. And he said, Assyria, you will not be able to stand against God, just like the cities of Egypt were not able to stand against God. None of the enemies of God will be able to stand against Him. Yet, the people of Judah, the leaders of Judah, are making the grave mistake here. Listen very carefully. This is what the text is saying, is that the people and the leaders of Judah are looking around for help, and what they do is they say, I know where we can get help. We need to go down to Egypt, and we need to make a political and military alliance with them. Well, notice in this verse here, in the second half of the verse, he says, and rely on horses and trust in chariots because they are many. It looks good on paper, doesn't it? They have all kinds of horses and all kinds of chariots that they can provide us, and that's what we need to help us. It's more horses, it's more chariots. And so the leaders of Judah here are trusting in military strength. That's going to be the answer to their question of what can help. It will be more horses. But look here at how things change in verse 1. There is that adversative but. It says, but, it says, and horsemen because they are very strong, but who, and these are the leaders of Judah, do not look to the Holy One of Israel. They're turned aside. They're looking down to Egypt. They're looking for help in different areas. They're thinking this is the solution or that is the solution. But what they've forgotten about is that what they need to be doing is looking to the Holy One of Israel. They need to be looking to God. They're looking all around and they're in desperation and they're not looking to God. And he says there, nor seek the Lord. I want to give you a couple of examples here. First of all, they're not seeking God's will. They are looking to other things, but they are not seeking God. I want to give you a positive example. Go back with me to the book of 1 Samuel. Book of 1 Samuel, and you'll see in the life of David what he did in a time of need. In 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 2. 1 Samuel 23 and 2 says, therefore David, listen to this, inquired of the Lord. It means he asked the Lord, he began to seek the Lord's will in a time of decision. This is what we all have to do when we're faced with a decision, where we're faced in a desperate time, is we need to go to the Lord and ask God what He would have us to do. Amen? In desperate times, what do? Do you begin to look around, and do you depend on your own wisdom? Do you depend on your own intelligence? Do you look for others for help? Or then do you say, you know what? I really don't know what that person's going to do, and I really don't know if this is going to work, but what I can depend on is that God is superior and He is in control. How about we do that? How about we ask God what to do now? And so David, that's what he does in this time of decision. He inquires of the Lord. And look what he asked him. You say, well, you know, this is not a very good example. Well, it's exactly the same example that the people of Judah should have done, because it's a time of war. Look what he says there in verse 2. He inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. I just want you to know this, is that when you inquire of the Lord, when you ask the Lord and you seek His will, He will answer you. He may not answer you today. He may not answer you tomorrow, but there is a promise here when you seek the will of God that He will give you an answer. It may not be the answer you're looking for. And that's why we have to come to God with an open mind, sincerely seeking His will for our life. Well, that's not the only time that this happened. Over here in 2 Samuel, go over to 2 Samuel chapter 5. This was a pattern in David's life. David was not a perfect man, but David was a man of God. God was with him. He had a heart. He was a man after God's own heart. He was someone who was sincerely seeking the will of God, and he made mistakes just like you and I make mistakes in our life. But notice in 2 Samuel chapter 5 and in verse 19 what it says. 2 Samuel 5 and verse 19. Once again, it says, "So David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand?" David wasn't an arrogant person, was he? He was someone who was humble. He was someone who said, you know what, I've had some past victories. I've defeated Goliath. I've taken and led armies out into the battlefield, and God has brought me the victory. And he could have said at this point, God will bring me the victory again. Let's go. But what does he do? He is humble, and he yields to God, and he pauses right there, and he says, God, what would you have me to do next? That's what we got to do. We've got to stop in our life in these desperate times, and we've got to inquire of the Lord and ask what is His will for our life. Well, notice there, it's exactly the thought in verse 2, not depending on our own wisdom, not depending on our own strength or the strength of things that are around us, but notice in verse 2 what it says. Yet He, is talking about God, also is wise and will bring disaster and will not call back His words. There's a couple of things here. First of all, God is wise, and God provides wisdom to discern His will. This is the source of wisdom, and we're talking about this in the book of Proverbs on Sunday mornings. It is God who gives wisdom. And notice there in the second line of verse 2, and will not call back His words. Do you know what that tells me? Is that God is trustworthy. Not only is God wise, but God is also trustworthy. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me tell you this. His promises never fail. His promises are always fulfilled. I don't know about some people in my life. I don't know if I can always trust everyone around me. I don't even know if I can trust myself sometimes. But what I do know is I can trust God because His promises never fail. He is trustworthy. He will not call back His words. What God says He will do, He will do. He can be counted on. He can be depended on. So notice this. He says, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of those who work iniquity. In these next few lines here, we see God in action, and He is taking action against the enemies, those who are evildoers. And it says, and against the help of those who work iniquity. And he's talking about how foolish it is, because he's talking about wisdom there at the first part of verse 2. And now he's talking about how foolish it is for us to go to evildoers. The Egyptians were not in the will of God, were not in the plan of God. Going to them was not in the will of God. Isaiah is warning them, do not go down to people that are not in the will of God. They don't know what they're doing. Don't follow them. Don't go down. That's not the answer here. And he says, and against the help of those who work iniquity. This is what he's saying here, is that God is against the Egyptians. Be careful when you are in desperate times that you don't get in a hurry and make a mistake and run to some kind of help or assistance that God's not in that. God may not be in that, so be careful. God, that may not be the answer there. Because then he says this, why are you depending on the flesh? Why are you depending on men? Because the Egyptians are men and not God. Why are you doing this? Why are you not looking to God? Why are you not seeking His wisdom? Why are you not pausing here? Why are you not remembering that God is trustworthy? Why are you not trusting in God? You're trusting in flesh? He says their horses are flesh. The horses are not the answer. The men of Egypt are not the answer. God is the answer. And he says there that the horses are flesh and not spirit. And then he says, this is what's going to happen to them. And this speaks to God's power. His power is superior over all things. And it says, when the Lord stretches out His hand, both He who helps, and that's Egypt being the helper, they are going to fall. You go to, you think about in your life and you're thinking, that's what I need to help me. That's what I need to rely on, but you forget about God. But what he's saying in this text here is that thing that you are going to depend on, that thing that is your helper is going to fall. It's going to collapse. It's going to fail you. Notice this. It says, and he who is helped, the one who goes to that thing, whatever it is, that person, that idea, that whatever you're depending on, that God's not in, it will fall, and guess what falls with it? The one who trusted in that. Dear friend, this is the message of the text. When you trust in God and He is your helper, you will not fall. But when you look away from God and trust in other things, both that and you will fall together. Notice what it says. And he who is helped will fall down. They all will perish together. Both will fall and will die together. The second thing I want you to see tonight is this. Trust God to bring the victory. Well, notice in verse 4, and he gives us these two images, these two examples. He gives an example of a lion, and he gives an example of an eagle. And what it is a metaphor for how God is going to act. I want you to notice this here. He says, for thus the Lord has spoken to me, as a lion roars, and a young lion over his prey. When a multitude of shepherds is summoned against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor disturbed by their noise. So the Lord of hosts will come down to fight for Mount Zion and for its hill. And so we see at the end of verse 4 that he's talking about God, the Lord of hosts. We'll look at the beginning of verse 4, right under the first line. It says, as a lion roars, and then you could drop down, so the Lord of hosts will come down. This roaring lion is a picture of God. Here in this little example, God is playing offense. I know you all are all sports-minded people and you like watching football and basketball. And when your team is on offense, what are they trying to do? They're trying to score. They're trying to overwhelm the defense and outmaneuver them, and they're trying to score a touchdown or they're trying to score a basket. And so as a lion roars, here is God in action. Here is God on offense. And notice this little parenthetical here, and a young lion over his prey. And then in parentheses it says, when a multitude of shepherds is summoned against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor disturbed by their noise. This is an example that they would understand. I know that we might be kind of struggling here. What in the world is he talking about, being afraid of their noise? When there was a flock of sheep out there, and there would sometimes be several flocks on the same countryside, they could holler, or they could whistle, and they could call another shepherd for help. And when a lion would come and threaten one part of the flock of sheep, it was really a threat to all the sheep, wasn't it? If you just let a lion run around here and eat sheep, what is he going to do? He's going to keep eating sheep. So what they would do is they would summon other shepherds. We need some help over here. We've got a lion. And all the shepherds would come together and they would shout at the lion and they would begin to try to fight against the lion. But in this case, what happens is God is the lion. All these shepherds may be coming out to fight this lion and fight God. But notice this, the Lord of hosts will come down to fight for Mount Zion and for its hill. Do I have to tell you who's going to win this fight? In real life, when this lion would come and threaten a flock of sheep, many times the shepherds would be victorious, wouldn't they? They would be able to scare the lion away. They would be able to maybe even kill the lion and defeat the lion, but not this time. This lion is going to face the odds that you wouldn't think he would be successful. In the real world, the lion would probably be killed by these shepherds, but not here. These shepherds are really, I think, representative of the nations. They're representative of Assyria and Egypt, and maybe even the leaders of Judah, and all those shepherds, all those nations, all those leaders of these nations are going to come out, and when they depend on one another, and when they are wicked, guess what they are? They are enemies of God. They are enemies of this lion, and they will be defeated. Well, notice in verse 5, there's a picture of protection. In verse 5, it says, like birds flying about, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Once again, we have a metaphor of an animal. It's really, I think, an example of like an eagle or birds that are circling over a prey, some kind of dead animal, and they are going to come down and they are going to be able to eat that dead animal. But look at this. This example is about God once again. He says, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Not only is God on offense and will God not only fight against his enemies and he will win, but God is also your protector. He's on defense. God is on offense and he's on defense. He's both. And it says here that he will defend Jerusalem. The people in Judah, their main city, the capital of Judah, Jerusalem, were at threat from Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. And he's saying this, you don't have to go down to Egypt. You don't have to look to other things because you've got God as your defender. He says defending, and here you go again, he will also deliver it. It is much like the words a while ago that his promises, he will not take back his word, he will not call back his words, his promises never fail. And he says he will deliver it, and passing over, he will preserve it. In these last two examples in verses 4 and 5, it's just a simple picture of that God is going to destroy his enemies. And he's also going to protect his people. I want to show you one more thing back in the book of Deuteronomy, and we're going to come to a close. Deuteronomy chapter 32 to close, because I made a little comment there about those birds. I really feel like that they represent maybe that image of an eagle, and that image of an eagle has been used to represent God at times. But in Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 10 through 12, I'm going to read these verses, and you'll see how that God is a protector. God is a preserver, just like Isaiah was preaching to the people. Listen to what happened many, many years before this. The message of God came to Moses in Deuteronomy in chapter 32 and verse 10. Listen to this. He was talking about Israel. He's talking about how he has brought these people to the land. They're about to go over the Jordan River. As you know, this is the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and it's just a praise to God. Notice what it says. God found Israel in a desert land. You remember where Israel was? They were in Egypt, weren't they? They were down there making bricks. They were enslaved. They were away from God. They were in bondage. They were in a desert land and in the wasteland and a howling wilderness. But look at this. He encircled him. Did you know that God has His hands and arms of protection around you? He is encircling you with His arms of protection in desperate times. The same way that God acted towards Israel, He will act towards you and your family in desperate times. God's arms will be wrapped around your family. And notice this, He instructed him. In desperate times, we're looking for answers, aren't we? We're looking for direction, and guess who is going to provide that direction? God is going to provide that direction. He is providing protection, encircling His arms around you, but at the same time, He is instructing us. Lord, what do I do? Where do I go? What is next? Well, God is instructing him. He kept him as the apple of His eye. That means something that is most cherished. Look at this in verse 11. Here's that image of an eagle. As an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, and carrying them on its wings. That's a picture of God, isn't it? That's a picture of God's nurturing. He feeds us. He protects us. And not only does He protect us where we are, notice what the text says. He takes us to another place. He takes us on His wings and He delivers us from these times of trouble. Look at this. So the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign God with him. Well, that's the same message that God is giving Isaiah, is that don't be looking around. You all are out of fellowship. You all are looking to foreign gods. You all are looking to foreign powers. You all are looking to the left and the right, and what you need to do is turn to God. I know it may not be the most complex answer that we're all looking for in desperate times. Yesterday, I was dealing with some issues. I was so overwhelmed with things yesterday afternoon and last night. I'm telling you, by no exaggeration, I could not even think. I could not even think. I had all kinds of stuff to do, and I was nearly paralyzed because of the worry and anxiety that I was thinking about. I couldn't shut up about it. Amanda heard it all night, and she heard it this morning when I got up. I was still talking about it. You ever had nights like that? You can't shut up. You can't stop talking about it. You even tell yourself, okay, this is the last time I'm going to bring this up, but Amanda, I got to say one more thing. Couldn't stop. Overwhelmed with grief and anxiety. Dear friend, I got to the point, I struggled for a while, didn't I? I struggled for an evening, but I got to a point, and here's where I am now, less than 24 hours. So, hey, I'm human, I'm fallible, I struggle like you do with things, and I worry about things, and I get overwhelmed with things, but I'm going to tell you where I am now. I'm trusting God. There is nothing I can do about it. It wasn't anything I did. It wasn't anything I asked for. It wasn't anything I wanted. It just came to me. It's in my life. I don't know what to do. Here's what you do. You trust God. That's all you can do. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for this word of encouragement. And we pray, Lord,